I would like opinion on, like, say, your question, Diddy, in in law, whether knowledge or, knowledge of right and wrong, and then you choose to do it, or if you're ignorant to it.
If you, yeah, this is, yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah. It's
I
like,
think
to me, it's like if you if you don't know something and you're ignorant of something, then how do you know that you're doing good or bad? Because you don't understand that, or how do you know that there are, for example, with law, there are thousands of laws. So how do you know that you're breaking a law if you don't know what the law is in the first place? I mean, basic law, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty and it gets to the really obscure laws that you don't know anything about, how do you know that you're British? Do you know
yeah,
that if you write a letter to
but
someone, they might get offended and something you've put in that letter could have you done for, I don't know, harassment or I don't know.
but
There's,
we you don't, and that's why it's the free will and the choice. But I think even in the first chapter of Dr. Wright's his thesis, I put a comment in there that had kind of addressed it. I don't know who this. I'd have to go look it up. I can look it up, but in the citations, like, either him or someone was arguing that that was the difference between Adam and Eve, and the serpent tempted Eve, but Eve actually was ignorant and didn't know. And the rule, Adam knew the rule, but the consequence, but it doesn't matter in in the world. If you don't know one of the God's laws that and you're ignorant to it, there's still consequences.
and
You
if
know
they
the rule, if you know the rule and you acquiesce to evil, was I think what the word used, then there's consequences there. So it kind of sucks that it acknowledges that, hey, we can't know that all the rules, but there's still consequences. But
and
my question too is, obviously, if we see children and we know when they don't know a rule, and they do something wrong, or we very well know they know the rule and they do something wrong, but they just disobey it anyway. The discipline is different. And then this is all about, and then there's all the grace and stuff too. I wonder how much grace there's, but there's an infinite number of rules, like, and the question is, and that's part of life, and that, in my opinion, that is building a relationship with God.
yeah.
The journey of trying different things to understand, and then finding the consequences of it, and then adjusting your actions based on that. So that's life. And then, even like, I'm going to say, like Jacob wrestling with God, that's all of us. Life is, building a relationship with God, is going back and forth of learning what to and not to do.
So it's
And
like
then it's much, and then I don't know how we as humans do it in law, if we have different consequences, if you can prove you're ignorant to the rule. Probably every society, takes that into consideration and then passes judgment, and whatever discipline different based on whether the person was ignorant to the rule or purposefully, or
I'm gonna
they should have known the rule or not.
I'm going to correct that slightly, because nowadays it's not whether you're ignorant to a rule, it's whether you are incapable of understanding the rules. So as Craig mentioned, like if you are mentally handicapped or something, and mentally you just don't know, like X, Y, Z, what's wrong. But nowadays, even if you don't know the law and you break it, pleading ignorance won't
no, but
generally won't help someone.
that's what I thought. But then, if as I was saying, there are so many laws, there are thousands of laws. How are you, uh, and if, say, for example, Adam and Eve, we're talking children, You know, it's not the sinner that's the problem, it's the sin that's the problem. So what was the sin? Was the sin being disobedient to God and not having obedience, or was the sin actually taking the fruit and taking of the fruit? And was that the sin? In this respect, it seems that the sin was actually being disobedient. So you can have a conversation with the serpent or the toad or whatever it was, but actually what you should have, what she should have done is then go back to God and say to God, I've had this conversation, and converse with God, so that there was some more kind of understanding and knowledge there of what was taking place within the conversation with the serpent. But this is why I find it really hard to, if you're an adult, grown adult, okay, fair enough, there is ways and means that you can find out what the laws are. But actually, if you're a child, how are you supposed to know that there are all these tens of thousands of laws that you're supposed to, unless your peers have taught you that?
Well, you're not, but I mean, a judge's discretion in the nowadays will take into account a child's like age and such with sentencing. But say like if a child still say smashed a building like through stones through a window,
So yeah, so
the
what you're
child would
saying
still
is,
be
if
they would
something
still be convicted.
so if something is so obviously a crime, then you should know that that's wrong. But if something isn't so obvious as a crime, then but that's not a mental incapacity, is it? That's just a lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not mentally incapacitated and they break the law, but then it's down to a judge's sentencing, they might turn around and say, you know what, this is their first time. Because a judge and magistrates, they have criteria of, is it their first time offending? Are they likely to repeat offending? What's their social surroundings like? Are they in a downward spiral towards more reoffending? Are they a repeat offender, etc., etc.? And depending upon a bunch of these criteria, they say we'll let you off this time, or we give you community service, or they'll throw the book at them and give them jail time, even if they're like a 12-year-old boy or something.
So that would be where they assume that actually, because you've committed so many offences, that you're never going to change because you've done the same thing over and over again. So you're not learning from your own mistakes. So in this context, did Adam and Eve, did they learn from their mistake? As soon as they ate from the tree of knowledge, they actually learned from their mistake. And is that where the forgiveness comes in? Is because you've actually now consciously understood that you did something that you weren't supposed to do.
I would argue that because they were not given the opportunity to repeat the mistake, it's hard to state that they learned from their mistake, just that they were punished and the opportunity to recommit the same offense was taken away from them. So like the same way that someone would be put in prison straight away, so that the opportunity to commit the same offense of like attacking someone or stealing something wouldn't be possible. Well, it might still be possible in some prisons, but you know what I mean. What God did was remove the possibility of reoffending the same thing. I mean, there's still other offences they could do. The story of Cain and Abel is a good example. Yeah. I mean, some the stories say repeatedly. Well, I suppose that's more of a mythical sense, but the first, was it the first murder? It's supposed to be, I think.
Yeah. But then later on, though, in the biblical stories, God actually, I'm going terrible. God actually asks for someone to take his son to a mountain to give him as his own son as a sacrifice. So
yeah, Abraham.
Is Abraham. So yeah. So within that regard, God is therefore asking you to kill your own child and to commit that offense that he has said you shouldn't do in the first place. Or so how does that wrong Who
But
judges God in this respect to be able to say, you know, that actually why would you want to why would you want to tell someone to sacrifice their only son, that actually he's waited so many years to be able to have and never thought he could actually conceive of a child? You give the child and then you tell him you're going to take, he needs to take that child's life.
Because God wanted Abraham to show obedience to God. I can't remember how it goes. Did he actually sacrifice his child?
No, God stepped in at the last second and said, "Hey, wait,
so
don't do that."
So on the topic, and then even a theory about that story, but that's the other thing that makes it even more complicated is, and what we're talking about right now, like the pastor of church saying this, you know, sometimes you know, the rules conflict with each other. And I think that's even like Brendan, what you put in the chat, like, hey, sometimes something is simple or not. But if, hey, lying is a sin, but you know, hey, not taking care of your neighbor is a sin as well. I guess just like the example he uses that she's used quite often is, you're in World War II Germany, and you're hiding a Jew in your attic, and a Nazi knocks on your door and asks you if you are. Well, is lying a sin? So I think next week he's going to argue that, you know, against like, hey, everything's relative, because people use the relative nature of the world to make excuses, but every single situation is different and multiple rules apply in the situations, and we have to make decisions of what is right or wrong based on, you know, a precedent of what is, you know, virtue, what is virtuous or not. So that just so there's not only are there an infinite number of rules, but often we're in situations where they conflict with each other.
Does that come down to pure faith though? Like you have to have faith. Does that come down to pure faith? I'm thinking about Abraham again, because if he has to be obedient to God, is his faith also in God that actually you're not going to make me do this in the end anyway? So therefore, if a Nazi's knocking on your door and you decide not, you know, to lie, it's because you're faithing, because you know that this is going to cause death of a certain death of somebody. Is that a test of faith in that respect of, you know?
I would put it down to the laws still, and I've mentioned this in the Slack before, that there are different types of laws. My personal theory: you have laws of men, laws of, well, humankind, like the Nazi situation you just said. That was a law of humanity, where they're saying, you know, turn over the people. And there's natural laws, like all around the earth, like law of gravity and whatnot. And then there's God's law, and which, you know, you might say, otherwise, if people don't believe in God's law, you might say universal laws like karma, or like the voice, like you were saying, with the Abraham story, I would say that's God's law, which supersedes the laws of man. So God gave men the laws of don't kill each other, but then he tested Abraham by saying, you know, but I want you to sacrifice my son. And he's pointing out, in that story, he's pointing out that the law of God is superior to the law of man. And yeah, and well, it doesn't bring in natural laws, but I would say natural laws are somewhere in the middle, universal laws. And yeah, it's a, rather than faith, it's, I'd say there's faith in there as well, because you've got to have faith that you're doing the right thing by obeying God's law. But yeah, that's the scale of how I would argue it.
And with karma, if karma is past and present karma, how then have you got free will if you've already Like your future is already pathed out for you, and that karma is going like, is there free will within that? Because
Yes.
you've already got this path out for you, and your karma from the future is going to affect you in your present and your past karma as well. So
it's the Dharma will, and it's not just that you can come back in a future life, but you can also come back in a past life. So the way you live your current life depends on whether, depends on certain things are going to be better or worse for you in the next life. And that next life could be past or present. And also that it's not a set straight path that you live. There's a set straight path, which if you live to God's will, you will walk absolutely straight and you'll have a wonderful, great life. But in reality, you live like a zigzaggy path and cross the path many times on your way to the end of your current life. And you can feel it within yourself, people who are trying to do good and like touch divinity, that when you cross those paths at certain times, you think, yes, I'm supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be doing this feels absolutely right. And then there's other times when you're thinking, oh God, my life's upside down and shit's happening, and this isn't supposed to be happening. These are times when you might be way off the path, but at the end of it, the scales weigh up, how much good and bad and how much you did the things you're supposed to do. And then that judgment goes into your next life. And it's even in that next life, you then have the opportunity again to live that exactly straight line, which no one really does that, or to zigzag left and right. But the starting point of that next life is partially determined by how well you lived your previous life. Does that make sense? So if I waffled on a bit there, but yeah, it's the
I was going to comment on Archie's comments about the relativism of ethics as well, and I think we all know what good is and what bad is, and we know that we should abide by the rules and play the rules of the game. And then when someone does evil to you, in a sense, you don't have the obligation to reciprocate with good to him. That's bad on your side. I think if someone punches you, you should punch back. With the same amount of force, I would say, but we all know what good is, and it is not relativistic. It's we know it. So yeah.
So the pastor will put another scenario that's, how do you make a decision? So he does this hypothetical scenario. You're driving down the road, a kid walks out in front of you and you have to swerve. It's the whole train track scenario or whatever, but the only way you can avoid from hitting one person is to swerve and hit another one. How do you make a decision in such a situation? Or even that it's not man's law in the Nazi scenario either, because the law would be don't lie is God's law, and the law would be protect your neighbor. That's also God's law. But you can't be honest with the Nazi and protect your neighbor at the same time. Those laws are in conflict with each other. So you, in that situation, you have to make a decision.
Yeah, but then you act in the same moral capacity as the other guy does. If the Nazi guard is not playing the rules, you don't play the rules either, even if the law says something different.
Did God even consider that armies were necessary?
But that's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, maybe.
I just want to throw in Tom. Do you want to chime in? Where you've been quietly listening.
Yeah, sure.
Try and get
Hi,
some
everybody.
input.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I've been a big theologian kind of my whole life. I went to Catholic schools, and I agree with Diddy. I mean, I don't think you only know what you know, and if there is truly a higher power up above, um, I don't think you would be punished for doing something that you don't know that was wrong. I just feel like I've studied like a lot of subject matter on this, and I just feel like everybody knows like good and bad, I believe, and I also feel like, suffering comes from not doing the things that you need to do, or continually doing things that are hurting you and affecting other people around you. I think that's where suffering comes into play. And I think sometimes that we need help in order to not suffer anymore. And usually that comes in the form of asking for it, from people who are like either more experienced or smarter than us. And for whatever reason, that seems to be more challenging than not for especially men. I don't know why, but that was like, I think the biggest thing I've learned in my life thus far is like all those years that I tried doing things by myself. Or in silence, praying about things when I should have just asked for help, because there's a lot of other people in this world that actually have similar experiences. And as long as you're willing to live in humility a little bit, it's like, hey, I messed up and I don't know what to do. I think you'll get the answers on how to proceed with things. And I think Craig talked about that a little bit about, the suffering that we suffer is because of disobedience or our interpretation of it. And that's kind of where I'm at with things. I mean, and what I've taken away from it.
That's great input. Actually, I want to just tie in what you just said with what Carlos and Archie were just saying with the Nazi situation. Maybe the answer is the path of where there is less suffering. So that would be the moral answer to the conflict of laws. By not turning in the people, there's less suffering all around. And
I think and I agree with Carlos too. Like, hey, and the Nazis are the ones who are wrong in the scenario. They're the ones not obeying God's laws. And I think that scenario is pretty easy to do what is right. But that's the next question. That's the next question that the pastor asks is, how do you decide in situations when they seem to conflict with each other? And they'll say that, like the utilitarian, there's the different argument, the philosophical arguments are, which one leads to the least bad outcome for everyone, or which one will lead to the most good for everyone? And those are kind of the arguments that people, rationally go through and have to make decisions in those scenarios.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here and ask about this question, as we've all been discussing. In ancient Native American times, with the various Native American tribes, there was sacrifice, and actually, to be fair, it's been around Europe and various other places as well. But sacrifice, meant to bring about a good harvest and a good summer and whatnot. That could be argued to be seen as the greater good, but the sacrifice part, murder, and maybe the individual didn't want to be sacrificed. Maybe their families and such wanted the person to be sacrificed. What is the nowadays? Obviously, we'd be horrified at that. And my question really to a group is, how does today, how would you today argue against someone from that era about if they wanted to sacrifice someone? And can I point this one towards Deb? She's been silent.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I think that's a difficult question. My mind just kind of goes back to the Jewish leaders at the time that Jesus was born, because this is well, not at the time Jesus was born, but a little bit later on in his life, during his ministry, they came up against the same question, and they talked about, you know, well, if we get rid of this one person and, you know, give him to the Roman authorities, then this is going to be the best for our people, and for our country, and like the later outcome. So that's what they had decided to do. But I like that you posed it, referring to a religious example, because like sacrificing someone, obviously that's part of whatever religion that the tribe had at the time, and so they obviously thought that this was what they should be doing. Yeah, that's hard. However, going back to what Brendan said about doing things for the right or wrong reasons, or like, can an action be good in some circumstances and not good in some, or evil or good in some others, that brings me back to, and I wrote this down, I don't remember the exact Ayn Rand quote, but I know she talked about it, that the motivation, like, we can do something that most people consider good, but our motivation can be selfish, or like it's not altruistic, I guess. And so is like our morals really relative? Are they dependent on our intentions behind them, or are there like black and white, yes, this is good, and yes, this is evil all the time? Is there objective truth, or is it subjective? And I think if we answer that, then we can kind of pass judgment on some of these other examples, even if they were from different time periods.
But would this be your argument to someone? Say if I'm the person from one of these ancient tribes and I want to sacrifice someone, and I'm not saying whether I agree with you or not, because largely I do. It's relative and depends on the information available. But yeah, what would this be your argument towards me to not sacrifice, say, some random person?
So I actually don't think that it's relative. I was just kind of thinking out loud, but no, I think that human life is of high value. So if there's ever a religion that wants you to kill others, I think that there's something inherently wrong within that religion that would guide those people to do that. So I would argue that it would be wrong for those people to do that.
Is Kevin here? Or is he not here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Kevin?
I was thinking,
would you like to throw some input in?
Sure. Yeah, I think it has to do a lot with like right and wrong has to do with how you feel in your conscience. But then the question is, what is your conscience? And I would say that it's because when you're given examples of, you know, whether sacrifice or whatever, but if you look at our justice system, we kill people that kill people. And there was a thought that if somebody punches you, you punch back with the same strength. So I think everybody in their conscious knows, or not. It depends if they're involved in the situation or not. But everybody kind of has a conscience that can dictate to them if it's the right or wrong move. And so if it's the example of the hiding the person in Germany or whatever, I think you kind of feel it. And when something goes really against your conscience, even if people are saying this is the right thing, then that's when you can, that's when people, they just can't do what the rule is because they have to follow their conscience. So yeah, I think asking what is the conscience, and I think that it's sort of your communication with spirit, and so that's my input.
Can I say it's still along the same lines, but I went to see a dance show by an award-winning South African choreographer, and the name is Dado Masala, and it was called The Sacrifice. And basically it's based on a rite of spring, which is it was rhythmic expression from a dance from the Swami tribe, and they would sacrifice at the rite of spring. Okay, and these are in Botswana. But the person being sacrificed felt that it was an honor to be the sacrifice. So I think it's like what Kevin said, this consciousness, like literally, if you are brought up in that tradition and the tribe, and your belief is that you are actually helping everybody else in the tribe, and it's an honor for you to be the sacrifice and be sacrificed to the gods, then you will, I don't know, I mean, the way that it was kind of exhibited was that you are proud in that tribe and in that moment that you have been chosen. And then there is a whole ceremony afterwards, which is a healing ceremony for the family that have given of the person that has been sacrificed. Usually it was a young female that was sacrificed. So I think it comes to the belief system within the tribe. We can see it from the outside, but if you categorically believe you are doing the right thing by offering yourself as a sacrifice, who's to say that you are wrong? I mean, I don't personally, want to see anything like that really happen, but if that's the belief system.
I was going to say,
it's dance as well. You should go and see it. It's amazing. Well.
No, go ahead, Kevin. All right, yeah. No, I was going to say that well, since Craig mentioned about the human agency and the free will of each one of each one, and I was thinking how if we amplify that to a tribe, it is the sum of the human agency of the many different elements of the tribe, the heroism, the acts of heroism of each person of the tribe. And I was thinking of like a bad deed that I did when I was 4 or 5 years old, stealing a pen in the supermarket. I was with my mom, and then I said, well, I'm going to steal a pen. And then I went home and said, I stole this pen. And then my mom, like it's typical thing, would tell me, okay, let's go back to the store. And then you say, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. So, I mean, I felt shame, and which was good. And so that was like an act of heroism from my mom. And then if we extrapolate that to the human sacrifice, I mean, it takes just the heroism of one mom just standing up and defending the life of his child. And maybe that amplifies. I mean, it just takes one to do some little step for the rest to go ahead and move forward. And it's hard to push back against tribal norms, because you don't question them. They are part of the human psyche, and it's normally they're good. That's hard to say, but let's say you think that's the ancients that brought with them some intelligence or whatever, and you don't question them. But at some point, you have to step. I mean, to fight back and say this is wrong. And then that's, yeah.
So it's only when somebody from the outside comes in and says, from a different tradition that comes in and has conflicting beliefs, that would say something to change the dynamic of that tribe.
I got to see if I can make some comments too on the same thing. It's the same thing again, going back to what they're talking about, what the pastor calls it at church. He calls it deontological, is what he calls the rules. And then my opinion of religion, I like the way you said the collective of individual has agency, and then a society or culture is like their consciousnesses or their rules are the agency of all of those people. And to me, religion is those lessons learned from trying and testing God, and okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong, and it's thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years of iteration of trying things to determine what these rules are. And that's why he calls them deontological, because they're learned through generations of going back and forth with God to see what his laws are and how you live in accordance with it. But that doesn't mean they're always right. And they change. But like you said, if it's so ingrained, like, you don't want to change it, because sometimes change, then they have to learn again the hard way. Oh, that's why this rule was. But it doesn't mean it's always right. And then even going back to Dr. Wright's one in this, to me, and then even the authorities over the rules become corrupted for reasons too. In Dr. Wright's paper, he even said he had Nietzsche saying as a positive side for women, often praised figures who challenge tradition and authority. And he may have seen Eve as an archetype of an individual who refused to accept the constraints of religious dogma. So I think like changing dogma too, but especially in the sacrifice, and we talk about sacrifice, I don't think you can change any of those one thing, change ingrained things like that, and maybe even one generation. But like you said, I think Carlos or Kevin, whoever said it, the one mother standing up. But in order to do something like that, you would have to sacrifice yourself. And I think we've seen examples of that in this class, and that's what Socrates did in order to spur the change in Greece. Is he drank the poison. That's what Christ did when he just said, okay, these are my beliefs and my conviction, and he was crucified for it. And the Romans didn't change overnight, or the Jews are still, people still haven't, but 500 years later, like that sacrifice of him standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, is what is required to make a change in a religious change in a belief system that's rooted in generations.
But Jesus's teachings were that God was within, so that would suggest that we are all gods, and then that God was actually a human. But also, like, the Bible itself is supposedly a rewrite of an older story, and the Sumerian text was written 3,500 years before the biblical text, the Hebrew biblical text. And this is a rewrite, so it's just like recasting and rewriting and just putting new characters in places. So you had like Enli and Enki and Enlil and people like that who were actually, and it was Edin, which was Edin, which was the original Garden of Eden, Eden. So that could just be a misinterpretation of a pronunciation of a word, but it was a rewrite. So the before, if he's saying about, like, because the newest thing now is he's saying about a set of rules with 3,500 years, and then they wrote the Bible, but the 3,500 years previous was the Sumerian. But recently, within the last year or so, they were talking about rewriting the 10 Commandments. So is there a point when history, and this is circular thing where it repeats and repeats, and we just realize that, okay, well, maybe because of what's happening within society and humanity, we need a new set of rules because things have got overcomplicated. So this is why now the rabbis and the religious leaders and whoever are wanting to go to Sinai, and they are wanting to rewrite the 10 Commandments. The other thing is, what gives them the right to do that? If the commandments were given to Moses.
I was just going to bring up something similar to what you just said, and in that we are moving into a new era for humanity. I have this whole thing like, areas and ideologies they advance with technology, and as we look in the past, various technologies have brought about new types of area, new communications, new societies. And it's my strong belief that, you know, the new technology that we're ushering into the world will bring about another new era, because it's an advancement on communication, monetary stuff, trade, and identity, and loads of other stuff. Anyway, my point is like you were saying, but I don't think, I mean, personally, I can see why they want to rewrite the laws and write something new, because I see humanity at this time as taking two paths. One path goes this way, one path goes that way. And one path is better than the other path. One path leads towards greed and war and all the types of things which God would warn against. The other path leads to a more honest, truthful, open society where people are more connected, trade with each other more, etc. And generally everyone gets a bit richer. Richer in life as well as goods. I don't think it's that we should rewrite new laws, but rather live to the old ones and remember the old ones. The story of Abraham comes to mind, where, as you guys said to me, he didn't actually sacrifice his son. God was like, no, I was just testing you, don't do it. But since that time, humans have sacrificed to their gods or God. And it makes me think, well, it doesn't seem like God actually wanted this. It seems that was humans giving off that God wanted it, but that wasn't actually God's law. If we look to the story, the older stories, is that you know, God's actual rule was like, no, don't do it. I want to see if you're going to obey me, but don't actually do this because this is bad. It's that I think that there's like set laws, like the Ten Commandments. Maybe they're not all applicable nowadays, but a lot of them still are. And having society rewrite some of these is potentially would lead to a bad way. And what's the word I'm looking for? The goal to want to rewrite some of them is kind of, it seems odd that, you know, like you said, is Moses allegedly wrote them. No, Moses didn't write them. Moses got them from God. So what they're trying to do is set themselves up as the new God by rewriting God's laws, if that's, you know, the way they're inclined towards. And I again, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's more a case of, and this is something I think Archie and Carlos was saying actually about doing good and bringing that good to the people around you, so that they do good and it spreads outwards. And I personally, for me, it's one of the key things why I love doing this philosophy class, because it's learning about the nature of good. I mean, I know the nature of good, but learning to better articulate the nature of good and to better explain it to people, because a lot of people think they are doing good in the world when in fact they might not be doing good. And, you know, if we're able to, alongside the technology, we're able to bring our ideology along with it of, you know, it's better to be good than to be evil, because these are the reasons. And we can argue and debate about the reasons instead of just saying, do good. Because other people on the other side will say, no, I'm going to be selfish and do bad because I get richer if I steal from people and scam people and whatnot and so on. And it's, I mean, like our years, the last 10 years, a lot of people are going to look back and go, there's so much scamming going on, so much stuff going on. And we've got to like drive through that and come out the other side and say, no, look, if you're actually honest and truthful and being more good with each other, and then that is more rewarding spiritually as well, than being evil and, you know, being you know, anti-God laws, really, or anti-universal laws if people don't like to believe in God. Yeah, I just wanted to add on your points about the Sumerian stuff. Apparently, Satan, according to those texts, the word Satan wasn't actually a name of someone, it was a title for a person who ruled Earth. So Satan was given to the ruler of Earth, whereas the others ruled in heaven, and then it got turned into, you know, the devil and such.
Well, there was several gods, and I mean, there were, you know, it wasn't a mono god. There were several gods, but actually, I'm just wondering while you're speaking. Sorry for that. Does it have like God wanted to reset Earth, just like in the Sumerians, where there was a giant biblical flood, but Noah convinced God not to erase the whole of humanity, and that's why Noah and you know survived the flood. And God promised that he would never do it again. Yeah. But does any of this have to do with the astrological clocks? Because when you look at the time periods of things that actually occur, do they align with the astrological clock, the astrological years, you know, Pisces, Aquarius, and the dawning of the ages, etc.? So is this something where new laws, new time, it's all working together? You've got universal law, you've got man's law, you've got God's law, everything is working together. So does it coincide with astrological precessional rotations and time periods?
I'm going to say maybe, but probably on a calendar that none of us can see nor understand.
I think it's kind of cyclical. I don't know if they align or resonate with, you know, celestial cycles, but just even the human cycle and knowledge too. You know, the revolution, you know, technological revolutions, and they make these changes, but we have to relearn all the same stuff over and over again, even though we've written it down. You can remember for so long, and you pass so much down to the next generation, but people have to experience it themselves and learn it too. So the ignorance comes back into play again. So like Joel was saying, there's so much scammers in the world too, but I think a lot of these people who want to write new laws, I think it's just the classic fatal conceit again, and they're not acquiescing to evil in their, but the consequences of their new laws are going to be bad because they're ignorant, and they think they think they can write them better, but they really probably haven't even studied, looked at the reasons why certain laws were put in place. You know, I've heard people say, the U.S. Constitution is antiquated and needs to be redone. But and honestly, the same person will say, and they believe it. Person I have doubts has ever read it, and definitely not actually studied it and looked into what the logic is behind, or the lessons learned of the past of why they put these rules in place. So that they just are ignorant to it as well, but the consequences are going to be the same. And that's probably cyclical due to our memories and other things in nature.
I mean, I've read a story somewhere, I can't remember where, about how humanity has apparently wiped itself out twice before, and that we are approaching the third possibility of wiping ourselves out, and either we wipe ourselves out again, or we get past this hurdle and advance and build a better society.
Isn't that what AI said? It's like it's not going to bother itself to wipe out humanity because we're going to do it.
No, we're going to program it and use it to do it to ourselves as a tool. But you can see the cycles in nature, other places too. Like nothing in nature just goes like that. Like fires are natural because it grows and it's too much, and burns, and then there's undergrowth, and there's all these cycles of growth and regression in nature as well. Is it possible for humans to be outside of that and find a steady, non-volatile path of growth? I don't know. I don't think so, because it's still that constant trial and error of new things, and you can't stagnate. You have to. I don't know if there's any way out of these cycles, and there's obviously going to be the downside of them.
I like to think that there is ways out of it, and like we are at the cusp of it, and this, what we're doing here, is part of it. In that, like Carlos said, doing good and learning how to do good, but also learning how to explain that to the next people around us. And either we're at the point now where over the next 10, maybe 20 years, we do that and we spread it outwards alongside the technology, and we succeed in being able to communicate, and that trade and communication incorporates this. And like, we use the membership club to talk to others who aren't in our classes, and obviously there's lots of people who watch these videos, and we, through our discussions, we explain why it's better to be good than bad, and what the difference is. And something like you said, even if you don't know concept of good and evil, you can there's still something there. There's still morality. I think that we can definitely get through, and it's a trial. Maybe God is sitting up there going, okay, it's round 3 for their tests. Let's see if humanity wipes themselves out again. Is it nuclear war, or do they get past this and get onto the next stage and become the civilization 1.0? I can't remember what the terms are, but something like that. Brendan, you've been rather quiet lately. Do you have some input?
I was totally distracted by something else.
Sorry. So, do you remember what the Tarkov scale, the civilization scales? It's like we're 0.5 and it's 1.0.
Yeah, then one is when you've harnessed all of the energy of the planet that you live on, and then it goes out to the solar system, and then it's like a whole galaxy, and like level 5 is some incredible.
Is that the thing that's supposed to form in the shape of a Trinity knot? Is that what you mean?
Don't know about that. It's
more about a level of technological development and being able to measure how advanced a civilization is, and so it was really interesting. Basically, what he said was that we Earthlings together are not. We're very primitive in the context of what you could be on a universal scale. If you can harness the power of your entire star in your solar system, then that gives you that essentially elevates you to, I think it was level 2, but then it goes much further. Like once you can harness all of the stars in your entire galaxy, then you're like level 5. And there's fictional stories of societies that are kind of getting up towards there, like Foundation or Dune. They're sort of pan-galactic civilizations who've really well advanced beyond what we have today.
It's my strong belief that we will never get past the 0.5 unless we have the ideology and the personality of the human culture to match alongside it to become a 1.0.
Yes, we need to be more aligned in our thinking, and that doesn't mean that we all have to agree and get along, but it does mean that we really have to stop killing each other for stupid reasons.
Yeah, we're not
because it's so wasteful.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, it's like if it's basic instructions before leaving Earth, then one of those instructions is not to kill anyone, isn't it? Really, and if we have armies, then that literally leads into killing. So why have we formed these things in the first place? Was it to defend against what was the purpose? Was it just a selfish?
Well, the Machiavellian in me says, "Oh no, it's all about defense," but really, the real reason is the best defense is a good offense, and
I mean,
you want to be on the front foot, and that this is the dichotomy of good and evil. Like on both sides of every conflict, there are people who think they're right and the other person is wrong. It's like there's that fabulous picture where you see there's a two castles and then two armies and then two navies all fighting, and they're the same on both sides. And one side is, our glorious leader and our fantastic army, and their, uncivilized rabble and their despotic tyrant. But it's the same thing on both sides. And in any conflict, there's always people who believe they're right. And there's on both sides. And so it's, well, who is actually wrong there? Who is actually committing the sin in that situation? And it's a really interesting question, because just because I think that you're wrong and that what you're doing is evil doesn't make it so.
Does that not go back to law, though?
This goes to the nature.
Sorry.
I was going to say, it just goes back to the same thing, Carlos said before too. There is evil in the world, and you can't, if the one side just doesn't do anything, then they're going to get dominated by, you have to, but then it just escalates, and
In a way, I'm going to put forward about maybe God's laws in some way is instructions on how to reach a 1.0 scale on the Tarkov scale. But also, I'm going to agree with Archie and say, as Craig also said, if you want freedom, you've got to fight for it. If you have no absolute army, say even if the whole planet Earth had no army, and then we all peacefully went to 1.0 Tarkov scale, introduced ourselves to a neighboring civilization. They had an army, and they went, oh, you know what, we're buggering up all our resources, but you have lots. And then, we're going to go back to a 0.1 scale.
Well, that's interesting, because that's the story of the Anunnaki, isn't it? That they came here from outer space to actually use our gold and our resources because they were running out of their own resources. So we've just kind of gone full circle in that respect of, and the interplanetary species, where we already view interplanetary species, and we just came back to Earth from leaving Earth.
Wouldn't it be interesting if this was the last planet in the galaxy that wasn't totally stripped of all resources? I mean, how would you know?
That would, yeah.
You wouldn't, yeah, completely.
Yeah, I was going to say also it's easy to feel to fall prey into this pessimism. Because I myself, reading what Craig was writing about whether Adam was or was not with Eve at the scene of the crime, and then some authors said he was there, some authors said he wasn't there. So they're changing the story, and then the consequences, the interpretation of the story is completely different. So a woman can be set aside, in a way, justified by the fact that she was the only one at the scene of a crime, and that is sometimes, the scene of that crime I can compare with the scene of Bitcoin's crime and how they've changed the whole thing. And sometimes you fall prey to this optimism, to this pessimism, and you don't know how to fight back against it. And it takes also some some energy to change things, and it's not easy. It's not an easy task either.
And then you used how they use the different tellings of the stories to justify different actions. I don't really have a point, but it just brings it to what is just and not, which I guess seems a lot more, not in since Craig's, but the idea of justice seems a lot more prevalent in the Greek culture, the Greek philosophers, than, well, I guess the same thing with whether it be an eye for an eye, or is that a theory of justice in the Abrahamic religions, similar to or I don't know, similar to what Socrates or the Greek philosophers would say?
So that makes me think about it just makes me think about the law thing again. It's like, what gave them the right in the first place to make these laws, and who decides whether or not those laws are actually good or evil, which is what Brendan was saying. What, the Greeks, they got together, they had a council, they decided that we're going to put this law in place, we're going to put this law in place, but there's an entire world out there that they don't know of, that these laws really conflict with their traditions or their beliefs or anything else. So it's imposing something that somebody else, so the other side of the world, might find completely unjust and think, well, it doesn't make any sense, that you're actually violating our law by doing that, or you're violating God's law. Sorry. Anyway,
hence why you have religious wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've gone on 60 minutes, so we'll end soon. But I wanted to just add on, but hence religious wars, what you just said, Diddy. But also, right, so I'm going to pull in points from Terry Pratchett, the writer. He made some brilliant points in his life. And one of the things like we have as a society all around the world, everywhere has this, is storytelling. And that this is a perspective that God's laws, the commandments and the Bible stories and such, were written in a way to tell stories of better behavior, how to behave nicer and better. And in a lot of respects, the people who wrote these stories were like, well, humans are prone to steal off each other if they can get away with it, or murder each other, and if they can get away with stealing whatever. So let's write some stories that will teach people why it's wrong to do that and why it's better to be good. And they also needed to give some authority to these stories. So, let's say God came up with these stories and came up with these laws, but it had to be written in such a way where the storytelling would be passed on from generation to generation, because it all comes from a time when no one could read, hardly anyone could read, hardly anyone could write, and books were not around at all. So the storytelling of this is the way to behave became Bible stories and passed on, and so on and so on, through the generations, on this is the better way to behave. This is, morally, this is good. And yes, a lot of them came from, I would say, men who lived in patriarchal times where the man was dominant and they wanted to keep men dominant. So I do feel a lot of the stories are male dominated, and keeping that bias in mind, the general theme was, this is how to be good, this is, pass on these stories from generation to generation. And then there is conflict in, like how Diddy said, in what happens when you come into conflict with another nation who has slightly different God's laws and such, and these are how the laws of God have been developed over time by people passing on these stories, and then men turning these laws into human laws, and giving them more details, like the UK laws on, murdering, manslaughter, all of this stuff. I would say most laws can be derived from the 10 Commandments. Most Western laws can. In some variation or other, that is for some of our laws. But yeah, there's conflicts when you come into other nations and they conflict with your own laws, and you start saying, well, these are my laws of God, and the other person says the same thing. And like Brendan said, both sides sees themselves as good, and then they go to war with each other and start killing each other and breaking all their laws anyway.
Yeah, they're both righteous in that fight,
Yeah. Well, that goes back to, sorry, it's like goes back to like Sumeria with Eden and God with Eden, the Bible with Eden. The Sumerian gods made man as a slave to till their gardens, right? So he was a gardener for the gods, so the gods had food because the gods were flesh. So what's to say that the God of the Bible didn't make Adam in the same vein to till his garden and as a slave, and that actually the reason that Eve ate from the tree of knowledge was basically to understand that actually maybe you do have free will and you don't have to be a slave for the God until his garden. You can do your own thing. So sorry.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Been great.
Bye, Brendan. I gotta leave too, actually. I gotta get back.
Okay.
Thanks very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you for being here again and everything.
Thank you, Brendan.
It's great. No, I this is like, I love this. I look forward to it every month. So I'm just happy to see that it's still well attended. I want to go back to being me and Craig and Joel. It's great to have so many people here. So thanks everyone for coming. I think it means a lot to Craig as well that he does have a steady group, and in some ways growing as well. So really appreciate it. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brendan.
Well, take care, man. Nice to meet you.
See you later.
Nice to meet you too.
Let me throw in one more before everyone leaves. I know everyone's probably got to leave. Just I want to throw in another word, truth too, because it keeps coming up like at church, and for me too is like sometimes almost God is like truth, but with stories, war, and justice, I think part of the answer is we tell ourselves is the two mirrors with the two armies is we tell ourselves a story that we use to justify going to war or not, or what we do, and we really need to be critical of those stories and analyze them and get to the root to see like are these stories true or not. So I think like just analyzing the stories, and because like we already said that, I mean, there's all these different tellings of the stories. Well, which one's true, which one's not, which isn't, I mean, that's harder said than done, but
I would argue that maybe for the concept of telling people how to be good and how to not be evil, they are all true, either side, any nation, and that has been more important point than whether they are factually true. But I'm going to end our session now then. We've gone on for 1 hour 20 minutes, which is good. I was planning shorter, but we just have these great discussions. It's nice to have. Does anyone have any last words they want to add in? Okay, Ben, I wish you all goodbye. Have a lovely time. Chat in the Slack, bring up discussions, and I'll try and get the next chapter out sooner for next month so we can discuss it a bit. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Everyone.
Have a great time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining.